Welcome to the deep dive. If you're like most people, you've probably felt that initial thrill, that rush of excitement when you decide, okay, let's look for a new home.
Oh, absolutely. It starts strong.
But then reality sinks in. Endless scrolling, houses that look nothing like the photos,
Yeah.
the sheer exhaustion of just trying to figure out what anything is actually worth. It's overwhelming.
It really is. It's an emotional roller coaster, isn't it? And financially, well, that's another layer entirely. You start out really susceptible, like one of our sources mentions, to being deeply affected by emotional gut reactions.
Yeah, that fear of missing out, or you
Ah.
walk into a place that's perfectly staged and you instantly imagine your life there.
Exactly. And suddenly you're making decisions based on that feeling, that urgency, rather than a solid strategy.
Right. And the housing market itself feels so volatile, it turns what should be a careful, calculated move into, well, almost an emotional gamble. So our mission today is to try and flip that script for you. We want to move beyond the usual checklist. This deep dive, it's really about equipping you with the mindset, the tools, the kind of data, frankly, that professional property investors use.
We're aiming to turn that chaos, that feeling of being overwhelmed, into a more disciplined, systematic hunt, like becoming a pro house hunter yourself.
Exactly. And we've got some great material to work with today.
We really do. It covers quite a range. Everything from the psychology behind daily habits and discipline right down to specific financial metrics like cap rates.
And we'll get into decoding what sellers are doing with staging, plus the really important stuff. The history, the architecture, things that determine value long after the new paint smell fades.
Things hidden beneath the surface. It's all about looking deeper.
It's time to stop feeling like you're just reacting to the market and start thinking like you're navigating it strategically. Let's unpack this blueprint and figure out how to set the right trajectory for a successful search. Okay, so the first really critical step, and it's one people often skip in their rush to just get out there and see houses, is setting up the right mindset.
Absolutely fundamental. Our sources are pretty unanimous on this. Strategy has to come before the search. You need a plan, a blueprint for what success looks like that's strong enough to carry you through the inevitable frustration.
Because there will be frustrations, right?
Right.
Especially in a tough market.
There always are. And if you're aiming for, high-level performance, which finding the right home definitely requires, you need what one source calls a truly compelling vision.
Compelling vision, what does that mean in practice?
It means it has to be strong enough to endure what the source calls the pain of change. Moving, buying, it's a huge upheaval. So the vision needs to be robust, something you're emotionally connected to, something deeply important. Otherwise, the sheer difficulty of the process can make you want to just give up or settle for less.
So if my vision is just, I need a house with 4 walls and a decent yard,
Yeah.
that's probably not going to cut it when things get tough.
Probably not, no. It needs to be deeper. It's about anchoring your search in what really matters to you, your highest values, moving past just ticking boxes like square footage.
Okay, so thinking about, what does this property actually mean for my family's future? My sense of security,
Yeah.
my long-term goals.
Exactly. Are you looking for a space where you can be creative? Or maybe financial security against market swings down the road, perhaps a community that really fits your lifestyle. The vision needs to be bigger, more inspiring than just your current situation. That's what fuels the consistent effort needed.
That makes the whole process feel more meaningful, not just like a transaction. And this idea of an enduring vision, it connects really well to another powerful concept from our sources, focusing on your trajectory, not just your current results.
Yes, this is such a huge mental shift, and honestly, it can be a massive relief if you're feeling beaten down by the market right now.
How so?
Well, think about the cumulative effect of small daily choices. Making a decision that's just 1% better each day, or maybe 1% worse. It seems tiny in the moment, right?
Insignificant.
But the source material really hammers this home. That tiny shift compounds geometrically over time. It's the compounding effect.
So that small daily habit is what ultimately separates success from staying stuck.
Precisely. If you only look at your current results, maybe the last 5 offers you put in got rejected, it's easy to feel defeated. Totally understandable.
Yeah, demoralizing.
But if you shift your focus to your trajectory, the fact that, say, you spent 30 minutes every single evening this week researching comparable sales and tightening up your financial model, then you recognize your habits are leading you towards success, regardless of the immediate outcome of those 5 offers.
That's a powerful reframe. It's about the direction you're heading, not just where you are right now.
Exactly. The source gives this example. Someone could be a millionaire right now, but if their trajectory involves consistently spending more than they earn, their long-term outcome is actually decline.
Right.
Conversely, think about a first-time buyer. Maybe they have limited savings, but they commit to saving just 1% more diligently each month. Their trajectory is pointed firmly towards financial freedom. In the house hunt, your trajectory is shaped by your daily discipline, not by whether the perfect house magically listed this morning.
Okay, so the secret then is translating that big, compelling vision into disciplined, short-term actions. We tend to think about big goals in terms of months or quarters.
But the sources really push back on that. They argue that effective execution doesn't happen monthly or quarterly. It happens daily, weekly at most.
So frame the house hunt not as this endless, vague chore, but as a series of concrete actions.
Yes, a systematic process. The key is to establish a weekly routine that ensures you're consistently executing your strategy. If you don't actually schedule specific, focused blocks of time for the important stuff,
Like analyzing deals or researching neighborhoods.
then you'll inevitably get sucked into what the sources call urgent activities that are not strategic. Things like mindlessly scrolling through listings for hours. The urgent always feels more pressing, and it crowds out the truly important strategic work.
Okay, so what might a pro hunter's weekly routine actually look like? It's not just driving around looking at for sale signs, I take it.
Definitely not. It needs structure. Maybe you set aside, say, 2 hours every Sunday evening. First, you score your efforts from the past week. Did I analyze 5 new listings using my criteria? Did I reach out to that agent specializing in my target area?
So accountability first.
Right. Then you use the rest of that time to plan the coming week. Set clear action cues. Monday morning, research cap rates for duplexes in this specific zip code. Wednesday evening, block out time for property tours. Friday, follow up on financing options.
Creating a specific execution plan.
Exactly. It reduces your reliance on just feeling motivated, which comes and goes. It builds the habit.
And that feedback loop you mentioned, scoring your week, that seems critical.
It is. Because if you track your habits, did you stick to the plan or not, you get immediate, honest feedback. And, as one source points out, the most effective form of motivation isn't some flash of inspiration, it's progress.
Feeling like you're actually moving forward.
Yes, when you see yourself making progress, even small steps, by sticking to your plan, you feel a sense of control, of accomplishment. That reinforces the compelling vision. It fuels your discipline. If you skip the tracking, you let yourself off the hook, you create the illusion of effort without the proof of progress.
This really all hinges on that final, maybe most crucial piece. Accountability. Taking ownership. It's so easy when things get tough to slip into victim thinking.
Oh, absolutely. Blaming external factors, the market's crazy, interest rates are too high, these sellers are unreasonable.
We've all been there.
We have, but it's the most damaging thing you can do to your search. Because personal accountability, owning the vision, the goals, and the plan is the single most important factor in achieving, well, anything significant. As long as you believe the solution is external, I just need the market to cool down, you're essentially powerless.
You're waiting for something outside your control to change.
Exactly. The hard truth, which our sources remind us of, is that the only things you truly control in this whole, often overwhelming process are how you think and how you act. Everything else, market conditions, other buyers, seller motivations, you can only try to influence.
So the pro hunter owns their process. They acknowledge the market's tough, sure, but they focus laser-like on refining their own approach, their analysis, their daily execution.
That commitment is the difference maker. It's what separates the person who's perpetually frustrated, just browsing endlessly, from the buyer who actually achieves their goals strategically.
Right. Mindset locked in. Discipline established. Now, that discipline needs to be applied to how we actually look at the houses themselves. Because when you walk into a professionally staged home,
You're walking onto a stage set, literally.
every pillow, every neutral paint color, it's all calculated, isn't it? Designed to get an emotional reaction from you, not a rational one.
Precisely. And the pro house hunter knows how to decode that. They understand the seller's psychology, and they know how to look right past the manipulation.
So what's the seller's core principle here?
The advice they get is blunt. You're selling space, not taste. The goal is to make the property appeal to the dreams of the widest possible audience.
Meaning it shouldn't look too much like the seller's actual taste.
Exactly. One source notes that if the house feels a bit inadequately furnished or kind of generic, unlike how the seller probably really lives, that's actually considered a very good thing for the seller. It means they've successfully depersonalized the space.
And the biggest enemy of that depersonalization, The things sellers are told to eliminate at all costs.
Clutter. Clutter is the absolute enemy.
Why is it seen as so financially damaging for them?
Because potential buyers perceive clutter as visual noise. It literally stops them from being able to picture their own belongings, their own life in that space. It makes rooms feel smaller, cramped, and it creates this immediate, almost subconscious friction.
And the motivation for the seller to tackle it is huge, right? We're talking serious money.
Oh, yeah. Sellers are explicitly told that decluttering directly helps avoid price reductions. And the numbers cited are significant, potentially saving them anywhere from $5,000 to, get this, $50,000.
Wow. Okay, so that's the value they place on giving your imagination a clean slate to work with.
That's exactly it.
So for our listener, the savvy buyer, this gives us an immediate checklist of things to notice. When you walk in, that absence of clutter, you should register it as a deliberate financial strategy by the seller, not just neatness.
Absolutely. See it for what it is.
What are some of the key must-dos for sellers that we should be looking for as clues?
Okay, first, scan all the horizontal surfaces, countertops, tables, dressers. Are they clear of papers, collections, knickknacks, most non-essential decor? That's intentional.
Check. What else?
Windowsills? Are they empty? That's done to maximize light and the perception of space. Hallways, is there any furniture blocking the flow? Removing it makes the pathways feel wider, more open. These are all tactics to make the home feel bigger and more neutral than it might actually be.
And then there are the really personal spaces, like bedrooms. They must be the hardest to depersonalize, but also the most critical for the seller.
Definitely. Bedrooms are specifically targeted to, as one source puts it, take the you, meaning the seller, out of this intimate space. The advice is usually to use very generic, plain bedding, often just plain white.
Like a hotel room.
Exactly like a hotel room. If you walk into a bedroom and it feels like a nice, neutral, high-end hotel, recognize that's a professional tactic. It's designed to make you feel instantly comfortable, like you could mentally unpack your bags right then and there.
It's not just about neutralizing, though. Sellers also stage for a specific target audience, don't they?
That's the next level, yes. They don't just erase their personality, they try to project one that appeals to a certain buyer. They use visual cues, often pulled from media or perceived generational tastes.
Like who?
Well, you might see classic mid-century modern furniture and bright pops of color in a Palm Springs house, clearly targeting a buyer looking for that retro luxury vibe. Or in a downtown Austin townhome, you might see extreme minimalist design, clean lines, lots of white, aimed squarely at a young, tech-savvy, urban professional.
So recognizing that staging strategy helps you mentally peel back that layer.
It does. It helps you separate the temporary presentation from the actual bones, the architecture underneath, which is what you're really buying.
Okay, so we've mentally stripped away the staging, the fresh paint. Now comes the critical part, quantifying the property's bones. This is where the emotional buyer might get scared off by potential issues, but the strategic pro leans in.
This is absolutely where the work begins, especially for negotiation. Let's say your home inspector flags a major issue, an old roof maybe, or an HVAC system on its last legs.
Right.
A savvy seller might try to get ahead of this. They might provide a professional estimate for the repair, often from a well-known, possibly higher-priced vendor, to try and frame the cost.
So the pro buyer should absolutely demand that kind of quantification.
Demand it or do it yourself. If the seller doesn't provide a credible estimate for a known issue, you need to get one. The danger is falling into what one source calls an anxiety-based guesstimate.
Where you just imagine the worst possible cost.
Exactly. And that number in your head is usually way higher than the actual repair cost. It costs you more mentally, and it can make you walk away from a potentially good deal or lowball unrealistically. Quantification is key.
Let's break down some of those potential hard costs for the major systems. We need real numbers, even if they're ballpark figures. But first, let's address the big caveat. Labor and materials. These numbers can vary wildly, right?
Hugely. Location, the specific contractor, the complexity of the job, it all impacts the final price. So the numbers we'll discuss are more like baseline guidelines, often excluding full installation costs. The real value is using them strategically in negotiation.
Okay, understood. Let's start with HVAC, heating, ventilation, air conditioning, guaranteed to fail eventually.
It really is. A basic service call just to diagnose a problem is often surprisingly affordable, maybe $60 to $100, covering about an hour of a technician's time. That's good to know.
But the big replacements are the budget killers.
They are. Replacing a furnace, as a general guideline, might be around $1,100 in core costs. Replacing a heat pump, maybe closer to $2,750.
But again, that's often just the unit cost, maybe some basic materials, before you add potentially thousands in labor for installation.
Correct. The installed cost could easily be double or triple that baseline figure, sometimes even more in high-cost areas or complex situations.
So how do we use these baseline numbers effectively?
As a strong negotiating starting point, if you see a system that's clearly nearing the end of its typical lifespan, say, a 25-year-old furnace, you start your mental calculation with that baseline replacement cost, say $1,100. You then acknowledge, maybe even get a rough quote, that the fully installed cost is likely closer to $3,000, $4,000, maybe $5,000.
Okay.
That difference, that's the quantified risk. You then factor that risk premium into your offer. If the seller isn't willing to adjust the price to reflect that known upcoming expense, they are essentially asking you to absorb the full financial risk of that imminent failure.
It turns a vague worry that furnace looks old into a specific dollar amount you can subtract from your offer or use as leverage.
Exactly. That's applying the investor mindset. You're pricing the risk.
Right, let's do the same for plumbing. Can hide some nasty surprises too, especially leaks.
Yeah, plumbing service calls are often billed hourly, maybe $40 to $100 per hour, typical range. Replacing a standard water heater that's fairly predictable materials might be $350 to $550, plus labor around $150 to $250. Manageable.
But leaks are the wild card.
Leaks are the wild card, specifically where the leak is. If it's above the foundation slab, it's usually a relatively easy fix, maybe $50 to $250. But if the leak is below the slab, that means breaking concrete, digging complex repairs. The cost shoots up dramatically from $150 to potentially well over $1,000 easily, depending on how hard it is to access and fix. So if an inspection hints at possible under-slab issues, the risk premium you build into your negotiation needs to be substantial.
Got it. And finally, the roof and exterior, the home's first line of defense.
Roofing materials themselves can be a huge upfront cost. If you know the roof square footage and the type of material, asphalt, shingle, tile, metal, you can quickly research the approximate material cost per square foot even before getting quotes. That gives you a baseline.
And who you get quotes from matters.
It can. A pro buyer might seek quotes from roofers who regularly work with investors. They tend to be focused on efficiency and cost effectiveness, potentially offering a better balance than purely retail-focused companies.
Good tip.
And don't forget the small stuff that adds up, like gutters and downspouts. They're critical for managing water away from the foundation. Replacement work is typically priced per linear foot. Knowing this unit of measurement lets you get a reasonably accurate estimate for repairs or replacement, again, preventing you from overpitching or underestimating during negotiations. It's all about quantifying.
Okay, now we dive into the serious financial stuff. And this applies whether you're looking at a small starter home or a big estate. Understanding the language of leverage, risk, and value is crucial.
Absolutely. Even if you have zero plans to ever rent out your primary residence, thinking like an investor when you buy gives you a massive advantage.
So where do we start? Foundational concepts.
Let's start with your own capital and risk. First up, equity. Super simple concept, but vital. Equity is just the difference between what you owe on a property and what that property is currently worth.
Example.
Sure. If you owe $50,000 on a mortgage for a home that's now valued at $150,000, you have $100,000 in equity.
Okay, and that equity isn't just a number on paper, right?
Not at all. It represents potential financial leverage. It's the basis for things like a home equity line of credit, an AELOC.
And the sources mention EPLOCs are often an inexpensive way to borrow money. Why is that?
Because the bank sees it as relatively low risk. The loan is secured by a hard asset, your house, so the interest rates are typically much lower than, say, credit cards or other unsecured debt. Understanding that your equity represents accessible capital gives you flexibility, maybe for renovations down the line or even future investments.
Understanding capital also helps when you're looking at potentially motivated sellers, like in foreclosure situation.
Right. Foreclosures, they sometimes get a bad rap, but often they're the result of genuine misfortune. Someone lost a job, had a major illness, or, and this is key, maybe they borrowed money on terms that were just completely unaffordable from the start. Unsustainable.
And how does knowing this help a buyer?
When you're dealing with any motivated seller, really maybe someone selling for sale by owner and FSBO doing your homework using public records is critical.
What kind of home?
Look up what the owner originally paid for the property, estimate what they might still owe on their mortgage. This gives you incredible insight into their potential position. Are they highly leveraged? Are they potentially underwater, owing more than it's worth? Or maybe they just had a bad experience with real estate agents and are desperate to sell quickly.
So their problem becomes your negotiating leverage.
In many cases, yes, understanding their potential financial pressure or motivation is powerful information.
We also need to be realistic about dealing with banks, though. They have their own rules.
Oh, they definitely do. Banks operate under strict regulations, some governmental, some self-imposed. They require appraisals, they scrutinize credit reports, they verify income meticulously.
And their main goal is?
Risk mitigation, always. Which leads to a counterintuitive point. Banks generally won't lend money to someone who desperately needs it.
Because desperation signals high risk.
Exactly. Need equals distress. Distress equals risk. So the time to get your financing ducks in a row, establish credit lines, get pre-approved, is before you feel that desperate need.
Good advice. What about for investment properties specifically?
Well, for investment properties, it's extremely rare for a bank to loan 100% of the purchase price. Investors almost always need some skin in the game, a down payment. If you hear about zero-down investment deals, they usually involve alternative financing, like the seller carrying the note, which sometimes happens with burned-out landlords who just want out.
Okay, now for the two big investor metrics that every pro home hunter needs to get their head around: cap rate and ROI. Let's start with the capitalization rate, or cap rate. Sounds technical.
It sounds more technical than it is. Think of it as an objective tool to anchor your perception of value. The basic formula is a property's net operating income NOI divided by its value or sale price.
Net operating income divided by value. And what does that resulting percentage represent?
It represents the expected rate of return on the property if you bought it entirely with cash. No mortgage involved. It strips out the effects of financing, interest rates, leverage, all that stuff, and just gives you the pure, unleveraged income potential of the asset itself.
Okay, but how does that apply to someone buying a primary home? They aren't planning to rent it out, so there's no actual net operating income, right?
Right, so you use proxies. You estimate, first, what is net operating income? It's the gross rental income you could get minus all your operating expenses, things like property taxes, insurance, maybe HOA fees, estimated maintenance costs. Critically, NOI does not include your mortgage payment, principal, and interest.
So for my potential home, I'd estimate what it could rent for on the open market.
Exactly. Find comparable rentals in the area. That's your proxy for gross rental income. Then subtract estimated operating expenses. Now you have a proxy NOI.
The new one.
Then you need to find out the prevailing cap rate for similar rental properties in that specific neighborhood or market. You can often find this data through commercial real estate reports, investor forums online, or by talking to investor-focused real estate agents.
Okay, let's use the example from the sources to make this concrete. Say the prevailing cap rate for small rental buildings in the area I'm looking is 11%, and I estimate the house I like could generate, hypothetically, $66,000 a year in net operating income if I rented it out.
Okay, so you take that estimated NOI, $66,000, and divide it by the prevailing cap rate, 11% or 0.11. What do you get?
$66,000 divided by 0.11. That's $600,000.
Right. That $600,000 represents the objective income-based value anchor for that property, according to the market's current expectations for return.
So if the seller is asking $750,000 for that same house,
you immediately know there's a $150,000 premium baked into that price. That premium might be based on emotional appeal, maybe speculative future growth, or maybe it's just overpriced. But it's not based on the property's current intrinsic cash flow potential according to investor metrics.
that knowledge gives you huge leverage, doesn't it? It helps you cut through the hype and avoid overpaying based on emotion.
It's incredibly powerful. It provides an objective anchor in what can feel like a very subjective process.
Okay, that's cap rate. The second key metric is return on investment, or ROI.
ROI is basically your success metric. How well did your investment perform? The calculation is simple. Take the ending value of the asset, subtract the starting value, your purchase price, plus any initial investment like repairs, and then divide that difference by the starting value.
So ending value, starting value, starting value. How does a home buyer use this proactively?
It helps you assess the potential gain not just from general market appreciation, but crucially from any improvements you plan to make. Let's say you buy a place needing work for $400,000. You invest $50,000 in a new kitchen and bathroom. So your starting value is $450,000. If, after the reno, the house appraises for $525,000, that's your ending value.
Okay, so $525,000 minus $450,000 is $75,000. Divide that by the $450,000 starting point.
You get an ROI of about 16.7% on that improvement project. Calculating potential ROI helps you decide if planned renovations are likely to add real value, or if they're just personal preferences you won't recoup financially.
This whole approach, using cap rates to anchor price, projecting ROI, feels very strategic, very disciplined. It reminds me of that Dunho investment philosophy mentioned in one source.
Yes, exactly. The Dunho approach is all about seeking opportunities with low risk and potentially high returns. Heads I win, tails I don't lose much.
Right.
When you anchor your purchase price using objective measures like cap rate, and when you project your potential ROI based on conservative estimates, you move away from making purely speculative or emotional bets on the housing market.
You're making calculated decisions.
Calculated bets based on quantifiable risk and potential reward. You're positioning yourself for long-term strategic gain, recognizing, as the source notes, that real estate is often a get-rich-slow game. It requires patience for values to compound and appreciate. Using these metrics helps instill that discipline.
Okay, we've built the strategic mindset. We've analyzed the financials using investor tools. But there's a final, almost unchanging factor that really determines a property's long-term worth. It's context. We're talking location, architecture, and the invisible influence of history.
That's right. And the old adage really holds true. Location, location, location.
Why does location consistently seem to trump the actual structure itself?
Well, historically, and this is something confirmed in major appraisal textbooks apparently, the value of housing was seen as being determined by its neighborhood location to a much, much greater extent than by the physical characteristics of the house itself.
So, a rundown house in a great neighborhood is often worth more than a fantastic house in a declining area.
Generally, yes, because location is shorthand for so many other things buyers value: the quality of local schools, perceived safety, commute times, access to amenities, even social status.
And to really understand location value today, we need to look back, particularly at how our suburbs developed.
Definitely. The post-World War II suburban boom fundamentally reshaped America. It was massively fueled by federal government support, things like FHA and VA loan programs.
And these programs made new housing accessible, but not necessarily to everyone equally.
That's a critical point. These programs disproportionately benefited white, middle-income families, making new tract housing in the suburbs affordable for them. These suburbs were intentionally designed to offer things that older, denser, inner-city neighborhoods often couldn't match at the time: good schools, private yards, a sense of personal safety.
The single-family house became this ideal, didn't it? A private haven.
Yes, the source uses that exact phrase, a private haven in a heartless world. It represented an escape, a particular version of the American dream.
But the source is also very clear that this development wasn't just about providing amenities. It was deeply intertwined with explicit, often government-backed policies of segregation. And this had a huge impact on property values that echoes even today.
Absolutely. It's crucial for a professional buyer, anyone wanting to understand true value, to grasp this. The appraisal methods themselves were often overtly biased. Some appraisal texts from the past actually suggested that the arrival of certain ethnic or racial groups into a neighborhood was likely to precipitate price declines.
Wow. So value was explicitly linked to demographics in official guidance.
In some historical contexts, yes. And it wasn't just guidance. Federal government actions actively enforced segregation. The Public Works Administration, the PWA, for instance, is cited as sometimes imposing segregation rules on housing projects, even in communities that had previously been racially integrated.
And then there were legal tools written directly into property deeds.
Yes, racial covenants. These were actual legal clauses included in deeds that explicitly forbade the sale or lease of a property to people who weren't Caucasian. Sometimes there was an exception carved out for domestic servants, which just highlights the mindset.
And these weren't isolated incidents.
No, they were widespread. They blanketed entire new developments, especially in cities out west, like Seattle, according to one source. The result wasn't some accidental neighborhood pattern. It was deliberately engineered segregation and homogeneity, often backed by federal policy. This created artificial scarcity in some areas and suppressed value in others.
So as a buyer today, understanding this history helps you see that current neighborhood demographics, density, and even perceived stability aren't just random. They were shaped by these powerful historical forces that directly influenced how properties were valued by appraisers.
Exactly. It adds a whole layer of context. You realize that what might look like organic market value today has deep roots in policies designed to include some and exclude others. artificially inflating value here and depressing it there. It's a critical filter for assessing long-term value.
Okay, that's the crucial location context. Let's pivot now to the house itself, the architecture. How does understanding the architectural style help a buyer look past maybe some peeling paint or an ugly addition and determine if the house has, good bones?
Knowing the style is like having a cheat sheet. It immediately tells you the probable age of the house, the construction methods likely used, and, maybe most importantly, the original intention behind the design. Take Colonial Revival, for example. Very popular style, roughly 1885 to 1915. This style was kicked off, in part, by the big Centennial Exposition in 1876, celebrating 100 years since the Declaration of Independence. People got nostalgic for colonial times, but critically, these revival houses were often much larger and grander than the actual Georgian or federal-style homes from the 1700s they were trying to imitate.
Interesting. And there's a dead giveaway, isn't there? A quick visual clue mentioned in the sources to tell a revival from an original.
Yes, a fantastic little detail. Paired windows. The sources state that no actual colonial or federal house from the late 18th century ever used windows placed side by side in pairs. So if you see paired windows on a colonial-looking house, boom, instant clue. It's a revival built after 1885.
That's incredibly useful. Knowing that helps you set expectations for maintenance, materials, potential issues based on the correct construction era, not some fantasy version.
Precisely.
What about neoclassical revival? Sounds very grand.
It can be. When done well, neoclassical homes have a lovely symmetry, a sense of dignity, often featuring those big, stately central porticos with columns. Think Greek temple vibes.
But there's always a but.
But, as the sources point out, the line between dignity and just plain pomposity can be pretty thin with this style. And worse, speculative builders, even today, sometimes churn out what one source rather harshly calls grotesque, tasteless, and nouveau riche buildings.
Ouch. Pale imitations.
Pale, flimsy shadows of the original style, the most obvious sign of a cheap imitation. Seeing a clearly makeshift, probably undersized portico just sort of slapped on the facade, as the source puts it, of a completely different style of house, like a basic raised ranch or a standard builder-grade pseudo-colonial.
So you're looking for that tacked-on, inappropriate feature that signals it's not authentic, potentially impacting long-term appeal and value.
Exactly. It screams cheap copy.
Okay, one more style mentioned, Queen Anne. Sounds very British.
It does, but the American version took on a life of its own. The term Queen Anne itself, used during the Victorian era, is actually a bit of a misnomer according to architectural historians. It wasn't really based purely on the reign of Queen Anne in the early 1700s.
So was it?
It was more like an architectural cocktail, blending elements from genuine Queen Anne style, but also throwing in bits of Flemish design, Robert Adam influences, Christopher Wren, even French styles like Francois Thirst. It was very eclectic. And the American Queen Anne style quickly developed a very different character from its English counterpart, often much more elaborate, more asymmetrical, with turrets and complex roof lines.
So knowing which Queen Anne, English versus American, helps identify the period and likely features.
Right. It helps you understand the complexity and potential maintenance needs associated with that specific style.
Finally, let's talk about the inside the floor plan. The sources suggest the evolution of American floor plans is surprisingly linked to things like national confidence and even technology.
It's a fascinating connection. The observation is that American floor plans seem to become progressively more open during periods of national confidence and economic growth. Think fewer small, boxy rooms and more flowing spaces.
But it wasn't just a cultural shift. Technology played a role.
A big role. The United States apparently adopted central warm air furnaces much earlier and more widely than Britain did. This was a game changer.
How so?
Because homes no longer needed to be designed as a series of small, compartmentalized rooms, each clustered around its own fireplace to trap heat. With central heat, you could heat larger, more open spaces effectively.
Which directly enabled different ways of designing and living.
Precisely. Think about the shingle-style houses built for wealthy families after the Civil War, those sprawling seaside cottages. Their floor plans often flowed almost seamlessly, one continuous space moving from the entrance hall into the parlor, then into the dining room.
Very different from the traditional British layout.
Very different from the British tendency, which persisted longer, towards having more numerous, smaller rooms, each dedicated to a very specific, often isolated function. So when you see an open plan in a historic American house today, you realize it's not necessarily just a modern renovation trend. It might have deep roots in this history of technological adoption and evolving cultural ideas about how families should live and interact within their home.
You're buying into that lineage, that history of design.
You're buying into that whole context. It elevates the search, doesn't it? You're not just looking at square footage and bedroom count. You're appreciating a complex tapestry of design, finance, social history, and policy that all contribute to what that property is and what it might be worth in the future.
Hashtag tag outro.
So we've really covered the waterfront today, haven't we? We've mapped out the entire strategic framework of how a professional approaches hunting for a home.
We really have, moving from that initial vague desire, that excitement, into a much more cold, disciplined strategy.
We talked about setting that compelling, deeply personal vision to keep you going through the tough times. And then adopting those objective investor tools like understanding cap rate to anchor value and ROI to assess potential.
Plus, learning to decode the seller's psychological game with staging and clutter.
And critically, quantifying those future repair costs for the big ticket items, HVAC, plumbing, the roof, turning unknowns into knowns for negotiation.
And finally, layering on that deep context, understanding how location value was shaped by history and policy, and how architectural style gives clues to a home's true bones and potential.
It all comes back to shifting your mindset, doesn't it? Shifting that internal locus of control. Recognizing that the only things you truly control in this whole whirlwind process are how you think and how you choose to act.
Everything else, interest rates, what other buyers are doing, the seller's bottom line, you can only try to influence those things. You can't directly control them.
Exactly. So if you commit to that professional's discipline, the daily or weekly habits, tracking your progress, focusing on your trajectory, consistently measuring your effort.
You tap into that powerful motivator we discussed. Progress. Seeing yourself move forward systematically.
And that feeling overcomes the sense of being overwhelmed, of being a victim of market forces.
Knowing the prevailing cap rate for rentals in your target neighborhood, knowing the realistic quantified cost to replace that 20-year-old heat pump, these things anchor your decisions in financial reality.
Right. It stops you from making an emotional overbid based on lovely staging or getting spooked by a necessary repair because you haven't bothered to price it out realistically. It takes the emotion down and the strategy up.
So here's the final provocative thought we want to leave you with, something to chew on as you plan your next steps this week. Take an honest look at your current house hunting habits. Do they feel like an endless, frustrating loop of just browsing and reacting?
Are you operating based on vague hope, hoping the perfect place just pops up? Or do you have a clear, scheduled daily or weekly execution routine designed to move you systematically towards your goal?
Because true power in this challenging market doesn't come from waiting for the perfect house to magically appear. It comes from owning your plan, owning your process day in and day out.
The knowledge is now yours. Use it. Go out there and start hunting smarter, not just harder.